All right, welcome everyone. We're just gonna let everybody get joined in, so give us a few minutes. Thank you for joining us today. Chantel, can you see my screen okay?
I can see your screen, yes.
Perfect. All right, we'll just give it a little bit longer for everybody to join in. All right, well, let's go ahead and get started. How about that? So thank you so much for attending us today. And what could be more fun than spending some time with a couple of CPAs? Uh, so actually, it will be a little bit fun today. So we're going to make it fun. So again, thank you so much for joining us today. Welcome to our speakers who have graced presence with their knowledge and expertise. So Chantal Schutz, our CFO, and Eric Ben, CFO. So, couple of things. First and foremost, today it's all about the moolah, statement of work, financial oversight and compliance, and the importance of all workforce leaders to become besties with the finance teams. So, together, you can avoid the complex risks that all too many companies face while still ensuring workforce strategies and spend are aligned to company goals. So, just a couple of things. First and foremost, let's introduce our speakers, shall we? So, as I mentioned, Chantel is our CFO at MyBase Pay. And Chantel, she's incredible. She's a wealth of knowledge and experience in strategy, finance, and strategic transformation, bringing multiple companies to scale, including bringing companies to be publicly listed, which is no small feat, to say the least. Also, she works really closely with our MyBase Pay clients and helping them drive their workforce strategies aligned to their company growth goals and uncovering new ways to save money. So she's also passionate about helping those non-finance people become financially fluent. And I would be one of those people, and it's no
You you
small
you
chore.
you do great, Kevin. You do great.
Right. And of course, Eric Chen, thank you so much for joining us. And Eric is a finance, accounting, and operations executive with over 20 years of experience with publicly traded companies and privately backed firms as well. He currently sits as audit chairperson of the board of directors for BioAmerica, a publicly traded company, biotech company. And he also serves as a board member for nonprofit AI 2030, focusing on promoting responsible AI, which I'm sure everybody on this call would that's probably top of mind for them as well. So
Yeah.
thank you so much for joining us today. So just a couple things about our agenda. We're going to really dig in the next 30 minutes. This is short and sweet, but we're going to get right to the point and how the role of finance and workforce strategies, how can finance help uncover rogue spend, and of course, avoiding risk and in helping engage with your finance teams. So we've got a lot to cover. We're going to go right to it. But first, a couple of things, which housekeeping. So everybody's on mute, listen only, but we have a Q&A section. So please, if you have any questions that pop up in your mind, pop them into the chat or the Q&A section. We're going to get to it at the end. If we don't, we will certainly follow up with an answer afterwards for you. So let's go ahead and I'm going to stop sharing my screen. Here we go. All right. So our very first question, and this is going to be round robin. So we'll just start with Eric or Chantel and switch it up a little bit longer. But both of you have long tenures as CFOs for companies of all sizes across all industries. How do the finance and procurement teams, HR talent acquisition, typically split oversight of labor spend, not just full-time employees, but flexible arrangements like contractors and statements of work, which is oftentimes a very large portion of the company's spend. So, Chantel, ladies first. We'll go with
I
you
was
first.
actually, well, I was actually going to let Eric answer that first because he has a lot of experience in HR, not just in finance. That's something that I don't have. So I thought we would maybe let him go first there because he
Let's
probably
do it.
has something really important to share.
Yeah, great. Thanks, Chantel. Really appreciate it. So from 2018 to 2022, in my role as CFO, I was also granted the pleasure of overseeing human resources simultaneously. Um, you'll also notice that 2018 to 2022 includes the pandemic, so it was quite the interesting situation to oversee HR during the pandemic. But we'll save that for another time. To answer Kevin's question about how does the finance and procurement teams, essentially split the duties with HR. I think in my experience, it's going to be really on the budget side. It's the finance teams working with the operational departments, the hiring managers, setting budgets, and then working hand in hand with those hiring managers to ensure that there's budget approval for every headcount that gets added, both FTEs, full-time equivalents, as well as flexible work, aka consultants, independent contractors, you name it. I think some of the best companies that I've worked for in the past, um, I'm thinking public storage right now. We went down to the nitty-gritty details of if you're bringing in a consultant, how many hours do we expect to hit every week, and what's the rate going to be? Um, if it's a full-time equivalent, we're forecasting out what's the carry of the cost as an employee that a consultant doesn't necessarily have. So
Mhm.
I'll turn it back to you for your thoughts on this and what you've seen.
Thanks, Eric. Similar to you, and actually, I guess I told a little white lie because very momentarily during the pandemic, I was head of global HR at mCloud. It is not my area of strength, and Kevin, you're not allowed to laugh when I say that. But I would say my approach, like similar, very similar to yours there, Eric, working very closely with budgets and understanding what's driving their motivation for wanting to add the headcount. One of the things I always try to frame for the leaders I'm working with is don't think of your department as a cost center. I want you to think of your department as a revenue center. So it may not be necessarily adding top line revenue, but what is it doing to contribute to either A, the company's ability to generate revenue, or B, the company's ability to maintain tight spending, EBITDA goals that we have, OpEx goals that we have. So I do understand that some departments simply are they are just costs, but helping the leader get into that mindset of like, how is this helping some sort of strategic objective that we've got? And we actually did this here internally this year with my base pay as we actually looked at all of our strategic objectives as we rolled out the annual budgeting process for the leaders and had those conversations. So I think when people start thinking that way, how is it either going to put money in our pocket, or if it's taking money out of our pocket, how is it contributing to something strategic? I think it really helps them buy into the process of like making sure that we're spending properly.
Excellent. To summarize, I think what's so interesting is that you both have had this experience within the HR leadership as well as being a CFO, which I've not heard of in my career, which is kind of long. So, but it does give you a different perspective to address the audience that we're here with today. So, and it's interesting taking that strategic look and guiding workforce leaders, whether they're in procurement or talent acquisition, but looking at it more strategically and how people and how your department delivers to the overall goals of the business, and never losing sight of that is so critical. So thank you both for sharing that. All right, next question. So here at My Base Pay, we've been working with many companies that don't have a formal contract labor program, meaning there's no MSP in place. There's oftentimes not a VMS that manages the contingent labor program. Sometimes the talent acquisition team is leading it. There's sometimes one person sitting in procurement, but it's kind of the Wild West as we've been seeing it. And many department managers in these organizations are just finding the workers that they want to work with, and they're sending all the expenses to the finance team to pay a 1099. So whether or not that worker is really a 1099 is the question. But knowing you both have worked for companies in different stages, because oftentimes uh, newer companies kind of fall into that realm that I was just talking about, but also some mature companies are as well. But knowing you've worked with both size of companies, large and small, what challenges do businesses face when there's lack of this official program and processes in place? And so I'll let Chantel, do you want to go first this time? Hope you're on mute.
Yes, I am on mute. I apologize. Work from home with dogs can sometimes be a bit of a situation when you're in a webinar. So I was just being safe. Sorry. So what I've seen is the biggest risk is that whole compliance, and specifically as it relates to, what kind of boogeymans can come out of the closet on the tax side of things. And I'll give you a real live experience that I had. I was in a company, we made a significant acquisition that ended up resulting in about 80% of our workforce post acquisition. And I'm going to say 95% of the people in that company were paid as contractors. Now, being a Canadian, I was very familiar with the Canadian laws at the time. I'm still very familiar with them, and I almost had a heart attack when I saw what was happening. So very instantly, we had to go ahead and we had to make some immediate changes so that we weren't opening ourselves up to sort of tax liability. So the whole compliance piece, and you don't know what you don't know. So someone in procurement isn't expected to know, and I'll speak just about Canada here, about the Canadian tax laws around the difference between an employee and a contractor. So again, it comes back down to like communication. It comes back down to that budgeting process, figuring out where maybe they have some weaknesses in understanding the different risks that are associated with the decisions that they're making, and just having that ongoing communication and collaboration. But definitely, like, you never want to run into issues with the IRS or the CRA or whatever other global tax authority there is that's out there that sort of looks under the hood and examines these things. So compliance is the biggest thing. Back to you, Eric. Oh, we can't
Operating
hear
here
you.
in Cal.
Yeah. Oh, there you go.
Hello, can you hear me now?
Yeah.
Operating here in California, here in the States, California is generally viewed as a fairly employee-friendly state. So we have to be extra careful when it comes to contract labor. I've I've had some human resources teams and employment lawyers set almost a baseline policy of we won't we won't contract with an independent contractor unless they have their own business entity, hard stop. And if somebody comes and they want to be an independent contractor part-time, a couple hours a week, and even if the hiring manager is saying, "Oh, I've known them for 20 years," like they won't sue us for, lost wages or benefits. Unfortunately, it's just the state of what we live in here is that we have to protect the company at all times, and so we'll push for them to either set up an LLC for themselves or figure out other options might be bringing them onto payroll as a part-time employee, a project-based employee where there's a preset deadline to where their project ends, and then they get terminated automatically on that date, subject to renewal. And there's ways that we've learned to work around it here in California, but definitely a high risk situation. And like you, Chantel, especially when you go through acquisitions, there are some companies out there that you might acquire that they just say, you know what, we're just not going to worry about this situation, and you can inherit a little nest of fun there.
Yeah. A few unrecorded potential liabilities. Yeah.
Exactly.
Yeah. Yeah.
Fun. All right, thank you guys. I think this really highlights the importance of finance working really closely with your HR and workforce leadership teams
Hmm.
and really understanding who's where, what are they doing, what type of arrangement it is, and that will provide some risk avoidance. So, all right, we talked about the internal alignment, the governance of spend. What are most common blind spots that lead to overspending on the contract labor, including statements of work? And
Do you
Eric,
want to
do you want
yeah, take that, Eric?
Yeah, sure. In terms of blind spots leading to overspending, I think that the best way that I go about avoiding that type of situation is to just always require somebody in the finance leadership team to have a final budget approval, whether it's on FTEs coming in, changes in the forecasting of how many hours a contractor is going to incur. Um, but I think, making sure that there's approval before the time is incurred is really important, or before the employee is brought on or made an offer. Um, because once you hire an employee, once the time has been incurred, um, you owe the money. You have that obligation, and to unwind that, that's a very slippery slope. So I always try to design processes to be proactive where look, I want to be supportive of the operating departments. I know they need to get their job done. And in a situation where we've explored all the options and I still have to say no, I'd rather say no at the beginning than at the
Mhm.
back end. That just becomes really tough. I'll turn it back to you, Chantel.
Yeah, so a couple of areas that I see, and luckily here at My Base Pay, we've got a really great system that helps us ensure that this doesn't happen. So knowing start and end dates, having proactive follow up on like where are we trending. So to your point, Eric, if we had a budget, say for 40 hours a week for 15 weeks, we're checking in at certain intervals of time to see where we're at, making sure that the 40 hours is all that the individual has been billing or the worker has been putting on a timesheet, checking in with the manager or the person who's in charge of that person to say, hey, your statement of work for this particular project is for 15 weeks. We're at 12 weeks. Where are we at? Just a reminder that person is going to be meant to be offboarding here at week 15. So for us here at My Base Pay, in terms of helping us manage our external workforce, we have an actual system that helps us do that. So we know start and end dates, we can be proactive, we can be managing it. Internally, same thing, making sure that we as the finance team understand what the expectations are up front, make sure that they align with a pre-approved budget. And Kevin loves this. It's his favorite part of the whole entire month when he gets his budget to actual for his P&L that he's responsible for. So see, he's smiling. It makes him happy.
I get to work with you, Chantel, so that makes me happy.
Yeah, there you go. So it's, having those processes in place, but most importantly, communication. And to your point, Eric, you said sort of knowing all the facts and knowing all the specific important timelines at the start rather than haphazardly or ad hoc, as the process goes, or even maybe at the end of the process where you're getting an invoice for someone that's, a month's worth of work that you didn't know was happening. So, yeah.
Excellent. All right. So, here's an interesting one. Knowing you both have worked for regulated industries, you worked for large companies, you worked for small organizations, you've taken companies public, you've gone through acquisitions.
Mm.
What, so obviously those stakes are super high when you put any of those things into the pot. So, what's the financial exposure that companies face when these SOWs are mismanaged, the contract labor is mismanaged? What does that look like, Chantal?
Yeah, so I don't want to get into like a whole long technical discussion. Eric's going to laugh when I say this about the difference between buying the assets of a company or the equity of a company. But when you actually buy an entity and you do it via like a share purchase arrangement, you're taking on the liabilities of that company from the day it started. right? So this is why a lot of companies will do asset purchases because those liabilities don't matter. So you're taking on the liabilities of those company, whether they've been disclosed to you or not from the day they were started. So one of the things that you would want to do in your due diligence process is to look at, hey, are there potential tax obligations that may arise as a result of misclassification of folks from the past? And to my earlier point, that acquisition we did, it was like 99% already done as I was joining as the CFO. So I wasn't able to have the chance to do that in the due diligence process. But I would say it all comes back again to making sure that classification is correct. Because when you get classification incorrect, the potential tax liabilities and the penalties and the interest on those can add up and they can become material. So again, making sure, looking at their workforce strategy, understanding what it was, understanding how they classified different folks. And then if necessary, you find a situation where they've classified them as contractors, but they should have been W-2s or in Canada T4s, going and doing some sort of an analysis on what is the potential liability to the company going forward if you were to get audited. Yeah. So it all comes back down to that classification piece.
All
Eric?
right, Eric.
I 100% agree. Always better to leave those pending liabilities with the seller, and as
Yeah.
we tend to say in finance, let them keep those dead bodies in their yard. Don't
Yeah.
bring it over to ours.
Yeah.
But I can't you know support that more. Like, do perform your due diligence. There's nothing worse than inheriting uh a PAGA lawsuit or some sort of class action that, as a CFO or an HR leader, I mean, because
Hmm.
it's going to be painful for both of you.
Yeah.
Um, there's nothing worse than inheriting and having to work on something for months upon months that you had like no responsibility for. You're just like, why do I have to do this? Like, I wasn't even around or part of
Yeah.
this company when people were falling asleep at the wheel and creating this mess here.
Yeah.
So I would say that, especially if you're going through M&A due diligence, um, do do the work up front, get in there, have HR team, operations team perform their operational due diligence. It's going to save you some headache in the long run. It's funny. Last night I actually had the chance to get together for dinner with employment lawyer that I worked with a number of years ago, and we were reminiscing about, oh, do you remember that one time that we went through that one case? And I was like, oh yes, like this is
Yeah.
very timely because tomorrow morning I'm going to get on a discussion about very similar topics. But my base pay has some solutions and some controls put in place that I think will really help companies avoid those types of situations.
Yeah. The one thing I forgot to add, and it's, my favorite thing coming from like, an audit background is make sure you document your your conclusion that you come to on a particular person. So we just had a Canadian contractor on board, and I went through the four things here in Canada and checked each of them off and said, this is how we've satisfied each of these four things, just to put in the file together with the contract for the individual. So yeah, documentation is always a wise thing. Yeah.
That's, well, we certainly have seen, and anybody can Google misclassification lawsuits, and
Yeah.
there's
Yeah.
pages on pages of of real life scenarios that even large companies went through, and it's the
Mm,
fines are in the hundreds of millions of dollars. So it can add up quickly,
yeah.
certainly based upon the size of the organization. But to your points, it's so important to make sure that you guys, everybody on this call, is prepared and understanding what the workforce looks like and avoid those risks.
Hmm.
Um, so we have about 5 minutes left, and I want to be respectful of everybody's time. So I'm going to kind of combine the last couple of questions. And this is going to be really quick,
Okay.
rapid fire. So um, each of you, if you could give one actionable item for a finance leader after this call what would it be? And
Uh,
Chantal, I'll let you go.
okay, I would say make sure your lines of communication are open across the organization so that people are comfortable coming to you, speaking with you. For the leaders that may not be, financially fluent, make sure they know that you're there to support them in that. We need to demystify this whole concept that like the finance team is scary and they make things confusing and they're just here to say no about everything. So I would say figure out how you make yourself approachable, make sure people around the organization know you're fun, like the chief fun officer, or I've also been called the chief fashion officer or the CFO grow. So just become more open and receptive and personable so that you can get that collaboration.
Amazing.
Yeah.
Yeah, I'll echo that 100%. I think it's all about building the relationship, building the bridges with the departments, and once people feel comfortable, then you're going to have an open line of communication, and that's going to lead to better business at the end of the
Mhm.
day. Remember, just like any sport that's out there, you're one team, right? And you're really going against your competitors. So the other team is out there, they're doing something else against your team, and so you really need all of your players, regardless of the different positions that they're playing, all on the same page. And I think for me, that's the fun part about being in finance and accounting is we truly do have the opportunity to get to know everyone within the company and build strong relationships and help support the team from that monetary numbers side of the house.
Yeah.
Excellent. All right. And yes, Chantal, you are CFO Grow. So,
Thank you.
um, we do have a couple minutes, but real quick, if you could give one action to a workforce leader, whether they sit in procurement or talent acquisition, knowing you both have had worn these hats before, what would it be?
Want to go first this time, Eric?
Yeah, I would say for folks on the people team, human resources, I think one of your superpowers is always going to be the ability to empathize with other
Yeah.
team members. So my best advice is if you're working with the CFO or you're in budget season, use that superpower, empathize with the CFO, the head of finance, put yourself in their shoes, what they're dealing with, and it'll help you work with them a lot better and get you through that budgeting cycle in a way that I think works out for both sides.
Um,
Danielle?
so my advice is, I think that's great advice, Eric, and I would echo that, but I have something a little bit different. I find that a lot of procurement teams, and this is not a judgment, but there's this race to this bottom for the pricing, right? They're just focused on I need to save this amount of money, and it's all driven from the rate or the price I see, right? And we just went through a situation recently with a potential client where we helped them understand that yes, the rates are just one part of the conversation, and yes, you can drive down costs by getting better rates by a different provider. And there's also all these other drivers, which I spoke to in I think the first question I answered about making sure that every cost center or every division that we have to budget is viewed as a profit center, right? So for procurement, don't focus singularly on the rate that is being given. Don't focus singularly on you need to save X percentage. Look at all the drivers into the whatever the workforce is that you're bringing on and is driving that cost. Look into all the things like what is the cost of training them if your turnover is high? What is the cost of, like, what kinds of costs can you reduce when you bring in really great talent that is going to sit around the Thanksgiving dinner table and tell their friends and family and say, hey, come work here, right? Sometimes we don't try to quantify those things. And those are missed opportunities to really understand the cost savings and not singularly be focused on a rate and a race to the bottom on that rate. Because we all know you pay what you get what you pay for, right? So, yes, a good rate is good. No, racing to the bottom to get the cheapest price is not always going to be the best option. And understand, work with your finance team and really understand what is driving some of those other things. Productivity drives higher revenue. productivity means less sick days. A great work environment means people stay longer, your turnover is less, right? So, I mean, I could go on. We could do a webinar just on that, Kevin, I think. But
Totally.
yeah, so that would be my one advice to the procurement folks. Like, start really understanding these intangible things that are driving top line revenue, expenses, and not just focus on the rate. That would be my thing.
That's an amazing way to end. So thank you
And that was
both.
so not planned either. It just
That
happened
was
to be the question that came up.
perfect.
That's great. Yeah. Yeah.
So there are a few questions that we got in chat, but I'm
Yeah.
going to, what we'll do is we'll follow up together as a team and then send out the questions and answers to everybody who attended today. So thanks again for all those attendees, and thanks
Thank you.
Chantel and Eric for joining and spreading the knowledge.
Yes, thank you. This has been great. And thank you, Eric, for agreeing to come and join me here today. It's been lovely.
Of course, always a
Yeah.
pleasure to support a fellow F-Suite member and CFO. Let me know I can
Thank you.
help you guys out again, and you guys have a great product at my base pay. So thank you
Thank
so
Awesome.
you.
much.
Thanks, guys. Bye-bye.
Bye. Bye.
Bye.